This is the second video on the range model of development. We're going to talk about a few examples to illustrate this model and answer a few questions you may have about it. Now, the first example we're going to use is the example of Rafael Nadal. Nadal is a great clay court player. That's his light. He's a great baseliner, and he was the king of clay, won pretty much every single French Open he entered in. But he used to find it a lot harder at the Australian, the US, and the Wimbledon, and that was quite often won by Roger Federer. And Nadal was like the number 2 player, I think, for 164 weeks continuously. It was the longest time anybody had been a number 2 player. So his game was great, but it was also a little reactive and defensive, and that became the burn. He didn't have the all-court game. In order to develop his volleying, etc., he had to take a few risks. So when he tries to play volleys, for example, at Wimbledon, he's uncomfortable. He could get passed. If he tries to hit faster services, which is required on grass to get full purchase, well, you can double fault. If you hit flatter shots, you could hit the tape, and that's his shadow. That was what he was afraid of. But he kept on practicing it. So maybe he got a low percentage of winning shots on those places where he went to volley. But as he practiced it more, the first Wimbledon he lost in 4 sets to Federer in the final. Then he lost in 5 sets in the final in the next year. It was a little bit closer. And the third time he won in 5 sets. One of the greatest matches of all time, 9-7 in the 5th. Now the thing is, although he developed the ability to serve and volley when it was required, he didn't change his natural style. He's still a baseliner, and maybe it's 95% baselining on French and 92% or 91% at Wimbledon, but he's still a baseliner. The difference is on those points when he needs to go up front, he can, and he does. And that allowed him therefore to go and win the Wimbledon. And then he won the Olympics, Australian, and the US Open, became the undisputed number 1. But that was only when he was willing to try those things out that were hard for him. That was when he was able to break out. Another great example of this is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs has some great lights. He's innovative, visionary, risk-taking, but he didn't know how to handle a large company. And so he said, okay, I need somebody who has my complementary strengths, right? Instead of developing my shades, let me hire somebody from a big company, John Scully from Pepsi. One of the great lines of marketing history is when he goes to Scully and says, you could spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or you could join me at Apple and make a dent in the universe. So he was able to convince Scully to join him, but Jobs wasn't willing to allow Scully's style of functioning. There were huge arguments, and the differences in style became very acrimonious. All Steve Jobs' strengths became weaknesses. His lights became his burn. His assertiveness became aggression. His visionary ideas became unrealistic. They talked about his reality distortion field. His micromanagement became control. Finally, the board decided to let him go and sacked him. And Scully said, he won't be missed anymore. Great headlines, right? Fall of Steve Jobs, WizKids falls. It was one of the darkest periods of his career. But that's what happens when you rely too much on your light and you're unwilling to develop the complementary strengths. And after this personal tragedy, he took on another job at Pixar where he was forced to develop his shadow because he was not an expert in this industry, in the cartoon animation industry. He had to rely on other people. He had to let go. He had to delegate. He had to go out of his comfort zone. And as he did that, he developed the balance. And so when he came back to Apple, he had both the light and the shade. And this time it was historic because he wasn't just launching products. He was launching industries. He wasn't just launching iPod, it was changing the way we listen to music. He wasn't just launching the iPhone, it was changing the phone industry. He wasn't just launching the iPad, it was launching the tablet industry. Every product became an industry in its own rights. Apple became the most valuable company in the history of mankind, and Jobs himself became one of the most charismatic leaders of all time, one of the most respected leaders. But he's the same guy who got sacked from his own company that he started when he refused to develop his shade. And one of the things he said later was, I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could ever happen to me. The happiness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me up to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. The point being that in order to move to the next level, whether you're a Nadal or a Jobs, you need to let go of what has made you successful. Go out of your comfort zone. You don't need to change your personality. So it's not like Steve Jobs is a different person, right? That people remember him for his delegation skills. They still remember him for his innovation, his assertiveness, his selling, his visionary aspect. Nadal, He's still the king of clay. People don't remember him for his serve and volley. So you don't change your style. Your style is what people will always remember you for. But you need to be willing to go out of your comfort zone when it's required so that you can fully express your strengths. It's a little bit like your light is your accelerator. It's what gives you your drive, your momentum, your energy. It's what people remember you for, and it's where you can contribute most from. The brake is like your shade. It gives you control over your power. And power is nothing without control. How fast would you be willing to drive a car that only has an accelerator? You wouldn't even get into it, right? But when you have both the brake and the accelerator, well, you can go as fast as you want. So if your light is to be friendly and helpful, the danger is you get stretched. You get taken advantage of. But if you develop your shade, your ability to say no, well, you see what's possible, then you can give even more of yourself. Because if somebody does try to take advantage, you'll just say no, you'll use your shade. When you're on the road, most of the time, 95% of the time, your foot is on the accelerator. You're using your light or your strengths. Suddenly a goat comes in front, you press the brake, you use the shade, you use those behavioral skills that don't come to you naturally. And once the sheep has gone away, well, the goat, after giving you a sheepish smile, you go back to the accelerator, you go back to the light, because that's what works for you. That's where your power is. A lot of people say, well, what about authenticity? If I go into my shade, am I not being inauthentic? But our perspective is that authenticity is not just about doing what you feel like. Authenticity also includes discipline. And discipline is controlling your natural instincts, doing what is hard or uncomfortable or unenjoyable because it is required. If you feel like pooping just now, you don't just poop your pants and say, well, I'm being authentic. You control yourself, right? You go to the bathroom and do it over there because the results are more important than just doing what you feel like. So some people say being authentic is doing and saying whatever I feel like, and we feel that's just laziness. You don't just shout at your wife and say, I'm being authentic. That's just, verbal diarrhea. Authenticity is about doing what is required to be successful, being clear on what you want, and then displaying the behaviors that are required. So if it's your light and that's comfortable, do that. And if it's your shade and it's uncomfortable, and if it's required, well, do that. So a great leader will never say, I can't say no, I can't be like that, I can't be like that. They'll be like, if I need to, I can, and I will. I'll do it when it's required, and then I'll go back to my natural strengths, because that's where my natural power comes from. That's easy for me. So here's a recommendation. Find the people you really hate, the people you don't like at all. Identify all the characteristics that you really hate about them, and then be a little bit more like that. Now, that may sound like a really weird statement. And what I mean by that is, if there's something about somebody that's really annoying to you, somebody's boasting, I did this, I did that, and you're like, oh my God, man, why don't you just stop? Everybody does this. It's not such a big deal. Stop showing off. Well, it probably means you have such a high resistance to marketing yourself. You probably need to develop a little bit more of that. So maybe you don't want to show off that much, but you do need to develop your ability to showcase your work, because you may have the greatest technical skill, and that might be your light, but you can only fully express it if you tell people, hey, this is how I can help you. So a little bit of showcasing will allow you to fully express yourself. And if you say to yourself, I'm only my light, it'll limit you. It'll mean that you'll be so close to feedback that when somebody says, hey, I feel that you went to your burn, you'll be like, no, that's who I am. And this is who I am. You'll be close to opportunities. You won't produce the results. It'll stop you working from people different from you. So be willing to develop your shade and go into your shadow. Take the risk that you'll go there sometime. That's how you will fully express the strengths you have and allow yourself to reach your full potential. I hope that was helpful. Have a look at the video on the range questionnaire so you can see how to read your output if you have done the questionnaire. That will be video 3.